toxic.
Do you apologize that you are toxic to me?
Here's what they never admit about Kody Brown's reconciliation efforts. They're not for his kids. They're for his camera time. Kody Brown's latest attempt at image rehabilitation appears to rely on a tried-and-true strategy favored by men desperate to salvage public sympathy. Sacrifice a former partner and hope no one notices the smoke from the burning bridge. Unfortunately for him, disparaging Janelle is the one guaranteed method of ensuring his children never return to the fold. The adult kids have already built their own protective perimeters. Maddie has walled off her household for years, and Savannah has made it plain she'll rely on her brothers, not her father, for life's milestone moments. The sons remain fiercely loyal to their mother, and the idea that they would tolerate an attack on her character, especially while he clings to the notion that he and Robin arrive as a non-negotiable package, borders on delusional. They recognized the duo's manipulation long ago. At this stage, the pretense of paternal concern is laughably thin. The priority isn't repairing bonds, but repairing optics. The anger has cooled, the grieving has passed, and what remains is a man willing to cast off his children so long as the public narrative can be polished enough to carry him into whatever post-Sister Wives career he imagines. His recent proclamation about wanting to retire his wife, careful wording considering he never offered to retire himself, suggests an ambition less about peaceful domestic life and more about future television paychecks. One wonders what exactly Robin would be retiring from, aside from the strenuous work of reorganizing that pantry and displaying her impressive collection of oversized snack bags. Productivity has never been her most salient contribution. Meanwhile, the show's editing seems increasingly eager to imply that Janelle was complicit in shortchanging Mary over the Coyote Pass allocation. The footage leans hard on manufactured tension, but the reality remains simpler. Janelle understands the futility of debating an irrational narcissist. A technical statement of fact, yes, a forced sale could happen, was neither enthusiasm nor endorsement. Anyone who has worked under a volatile superior recognizes the tactic. When presented with a legally possible but catastrophically foolish idea, one responds with polite neutrality and saves energy for the moment it actually materializes. Janelle's deadpan delivery spoke volumes. Kody, however, persists in shrinking himself down to the size of his own resentments. The former wives have long since moved on, but he and Robin remain determined to cradle old injuries as though they were heirlooms. The children's needs never ranked highly in his hierarchy. Even Christine's retelling of their early years paints a consistent picture. The spotlight was always angled toward him. The performance of paternal devotion continues, but only as long as the applause does. In the end, the solution is obvious. The rest of the family has embraced distance, growth, and a future without theatrics. Kody and Robin, however, seem committed to lingering center stage long after the audience has stopped clapping. Never trust a peacekeeper who panics at the thought of peace. Robin's reaction was fleeting, but revealing. At the mere suggestion that Kody might apologize to his former wives, her face tightened into a brief, unmistakable flash of disgust. It was the kind of expression that announces, without a syllable spoken, that reconciliation is not on her wish list. Harmony, after all, would deprive her of the carefully curated chaos that keeps her seated at the center of the narrative. The notion of Kody making amends carries an obvious threat. If he ever stops seeing himself as a perennial victim, the power dynamic shifts. His martyrdom is her leverage. convince him that everyone hates him except her, and the bond becomes unbreakable, or at least inconveniently codependent. Any gesture toward accountability jeopardizes the system. It would require her to demonstrate the gracious, peacemaking persona she performs so earnestly, a role far easier to proclaim than to practice. The tension in the counselor's office was palpable. The last thing she wanted was an objective observer illuminating the fact that the so-called adversaries might actually be the ones owed an apology. Such clarity would force a crack in the narrative she and Cody have spent years polishing, that both are misunderstood saviors, besieged by unfair critics. Behind the scenes, the inevitable damage control is all but guaranteed.
Drama is not merely an inconvenience in this household. It is a beloved pastime. Robin cultivates victimhood the way others cultivate hobbies, and Cody eagerly bolsters her role with his self-styled hero complex. Together, they spin a world where everyone else is the enemy, and where manipulating the emotional temperature of the family is a full-time occupation. It is no wonder she lives in constant fear that he might reconnect with his children, or that her own may eventually see through the performance. And yet, despite this elaborate theater of grievances, there remains the perennial insistence that she despises girl games. The irony requires no further commentary. Cody, ever gallant in his defense of his precious Robin, seems determined to ignore the obvious, though the act convinces no one beyond the two of them. Here's the truth the narrative tried to soften. Robin didn't join a family. She annexed it. Robin Brown's entrance into the Brown family was marketed as a heartfelt bid for unity, but the early pattern of behavior suggested something far more calculated. Few moments illustrate this better than the legendary 11-day honeymoon she and Cody indulged in, a marathon of self-absorption unmatched in the family's history. This was not merely inconsiderate, it was a clarion announcement of priorities. While the original three wives juggled an army of children, one of them caring for a newborn, Robin's own children were carefully sequestered with her mother. Integration was apparently optional when it came to her household. The message was unmistakable. The new family would remain politely adjacent to the old one, never truly blending. Robin maintained separation while insisting it was all for the good of the collective, a justification delivered so frequently it became its own storyline. Her sense of entitlement surfaced even before the honeymoon. She staged a sentimental bonding moment by inviting the sister wives to help her choose a wedding dress, all while reserving the real experience, dress shopping with Cody, for herself. Considering that two of the original wives never had weddings of their own, and one of them deeply cared about such milestones, the theatrics bordered on cruelty. It was a performance designed to echo unity while carefully securing her position as the special wife. This was followed by her seamless insertion into the nightly rotation during the dating phase, despite Mary and Christine's objections that such access had always been reserved for actual marriages. Robin decreed it fair, and that was apparently the end of the discussion. Her willingness to publicly weigh in, long before earning a place in that dynamic, spoke volumes about her intentions, and even more about Cody's willingness to indulge them. The pattern continued with the now infamous Hawaii trip, undertaken by Cody and Robin alone, nanny included, supposedly financed with her grocery money. Financial modesty has rarely looked so tropical. When people come into money, the saying goes, their true nature surfaces. The surf, in this case, was distinctly one-sided. It was unimaginable that such a luxury trip would have been permitted with any of the original wives.
Even moments of emotion were delivered with conveniently timed theatrics. When the OG3 voiced their pain in the early days, Robin's tears flowed with Oscar-ready precision, accompanied by declarations of heartbreak that struck observers as more performance art than empathy. Yet, despite insisting she longed for the full plural marriage experience, porch sitting, sister-wife bonding, the whole picturesque tableau, she simultaneously accepted every exception, advantage, and indulgence that set her apart. The oversized honeymoon, the exclusive dress shopping, the rotation access, the family separation, the luxury trips, each justified, each unique, each quietly carving a wedge deeper into the already strained household. Eventually, the original wives extricated themselves from the manipulation, gaslighting, and strategically selective unity they endured for years. Robin now possesses her coveted prize, Cody, undivided, unshared, unbuffered. Watching them occupy the isolated kingdom they built together, one resounding with mutual misery, feels less like a victory and more like the inevitable conclusion of every warning sign they so diligently ignored. Here's the part of this family drama they hope you never question. The parent crying about alienation is the one causing it. The latest display involves a tearful insistence that biological fathers are essential, that without a man-shaped presence, children will apparently develop a gaping emotional crater. Touching, certainly, except for the small complication that this philosophy applies only when the father in question is the one currently favored on camera. When it comes to the children's actual biological father, the concern evaporates with suspicious speed. That particular hole in the heart seems to have been deemed either obsolete or imaginary. This absence of self-awareness isn't surprising. Individuals who operate with the grandiosity and fragile ego characteristic of narcissistic personalities rarely trouble themselves with introspection. Their belief in their own benevolence is unshakable, until the loss of something they want looms large enough to motivate a temporary performance of growth. In this household, the pattern is unmistakable. Consider the ongoing theater around parental alienation. Tears flow freely over the imagined threat of being shut out from children, an emotional performance made particularly rich by the fact that the very same person lamenting alienation has repeatedly inflicted it. The earliest episodes offered clear examples. Children were pressured to call a new husband dad, despite having an involved father. Their mother delivered a dramatic speech about having her purity stolen, effectively recasting their father as a villain in their presence. Years later, that habit of rewriting history hasn't softened. A narrative has been crafted in which the blame for every fractured relationship rests solely with fathers, siblings, or circumstances, never with the person wielding the pen. Even during the pandemic, the pattern held. Children were told that their siblings didn't really like them when holiday plans didn't align with one household's demands. A simple scheduling conflict over a Christmas exchange was reframed as rejection. And when not everyone could drop everything for a video call, emotional punishment followed. Alienation wasn't merely a byproduct of dysfunction, it was practically policy. Yet somehow, the tears always return when someone else's shortcomings can be spotlighted. The same household that spent years undermining established parent-child bonds now insists that someone else's children will be spiritually damaged if deprived of a man who couldn't be bothered to nurture his relationships while they were still salvageable. The tragedy, we are told, is the impending Cody-sized hole in their lives. Apparently, the years of actual absenteeism don't count. What matters is the narrative being promoted this week. Meanwhile, the children's accounts paint a contradictory picture. Some say they haven't heard from their father in years. Some describe being ignored at a sibling's funeral. One son recalls a phone call in which the only message was, "I forgive you. Will you forgive me?" A non-apology disguised as emotional labor. And still, the refrain persists. The children simply won't reciprocate. The fault lies everywhere except where the responsibility actually belongs. At some point, a parent forfeits the right to declare themselves indispensable. The hypocrisy continues in smaller ways. Hair-twirling preambles are reliably followed by attempts to steer the patriarch's thoughts, often punctuated with self-serving additions such as, "and a relationship with me." The self-portrayal as saint, martyr, and misunderstood victim rotates depending on the required angle. Meanwhile, the partner in question weeps over father-son relationships he shattered himself, mourning not the loss of his own children, but the memory of his deceased father. Even that grief is framed as something done to him, rather than a prompt for overdue accountability. It leaves viewers with two possibilities: a diabolically calculated persona engineered to maintain control through perpetual victimhood, or a level of delusion so profound it borders on performance art. Perhaps it is truly a joint effort, a shared custody arrangement over a single functioning neuron. What remains consistent is the projection. Every accusation made about others' motives reliably reflects the speaker's own behavior. Every lament about alienation, every plea about fractured bonds, every sermon about familial duty, each one reveals more about the person delivering it than the people supposedly at fault. And that, more than anything, is the defining signature of this family drama. A cast that exposes itself with such precision that no outside critique could possibly compete. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Robin Brown's lost father narrative falls apart the moment you remember what she did to her children's father. Robin Brown's latest attempt to convince the world she is the spitting image of her biological father offers the usual spectacle: confident assertion, questionable evidence, and a startling lack of self-awareness. Yes, there is dark hair. Beyond that, the resemblance requires a level of imagination usually reserved for paranormal enthusiasts. Her features align far more neatly with those of her mother, Alice, a fact anyone with functioning eyesight seems capable of acknowledging. Everyone, that is, except Robin. The tragedy here is not her shaky grasp of genetics, but her unwavering commitment to casting herself as the wounded child while quietly replicating the very patterns she claims to mourn. Tears flow freely when she laments her lost connection to her father, yet she has shown no comparable concern for the connections she severed between her own children and their biological father. The pattern is unmistakable. She mourns the fractures that happened to her, while facilitating the fractures she creates for others. Consider the broader fallout. 13 children lost their relationship with Cody the moment it ceased to serve her interests. The older ones, already semi-launched, escaped the brunt of the estrangement. The younger ones were not so lucky. Gabe and Garrison paid the highest emotional price, though the show frames their pain as little more than collateral damage in the ongoing martyrdom pageant starring Cody and Robin. Both adults somehow manage to wound children and then perform shock that anyone feels injured. A competent therapist would point out that she is replaying her childhood dynamics almost beat for beat, but competence is hardly the issue. No clinician can outmaneuver a worldview fortified by delusion. Even casual viewers can see the cyclical dysfunction unfolding in real time. The denial is so airtight that even her own mother's reflection staring back from the mirror seems to be misidentified as her father's. Her insistence on the resemblance becomes almost comedic. She looks like her mother. She ages like her mother. She behaves like her mother. Yet she clings to this narrative of paternal likeness as though it were a lifeline. A few defenders may argue that she resembles both parents, that her happiest expressions echo her father, and that denying her this identification is unnecessarily cruel. But the resemblance, real or imagined, is the least relevant issue in the entire conversation. What matters is the selective sentimentality, the outrage over the father she lost, paired with absolute silence about the father her children lost. The empathy she demands for herself never seems to extend to the people harmed by her choices. The result is a portrait not of a misunderstood woman, but of someone profoundly out of touch, emotionally inconsistent, and fully committed to a narrative in which she is forever the victim and never the architect. The harshest conclusion is also the simplest. Something is deeply wrong, and the damage radiates outward to everyone around her. Whether she resembles her father or not is irrelevant. The more striking likeness is the one she shares with her mother, both in appearance and in the patterns she seems determined to repeat. Here's the side of the Brown family's grief montage that exposes the entire performance. Robin Brown has perfected a remarkable party trick, the ability to dissolve into theatrics at the mere mention of Coyote Pass while maintaining the emotional dryness of the Mojave Desert when faced with actual human tragedy. The family patriarch can be recounting the estrangement from his children or grieving the death of his own father, and yet her tear ducts remain steadfastly unmoved. Until, of course, the topic veers back toward land, logistics, or anything that conveniently redirects attention away from her own role in the family collapse. The performance is consistent. When discussing the passing of Garrison, the family's real loss is treated with clinical detachment. But introduce the prospect of reconciling with the older children, those sane children whose relationships were systematically eroded, and suddenly the emotional floodgates creak open just enough to signal distress without producing an actual tear. The tears are never about grief or empathy. They're a strategic device, a preemptive shield against accountability. Nothing clears a room faster than a well-timed dab at an entirely dry eye.
The conversation about reconnecting with the adult children is a masterclass in deflection. The claim that they have been heavily influenced is particularly rich, considering the years spent influencing their father to treat his own family like an inconvenience. The narrative conveniently sidesteps the simpler explanation. Alienation doesn't spring from thin air. It generally requires a catalyst, and this family has had no shortage of those. As for the patriarch himself, the grief sequence plays out with equal theatrical ambition. His lament over wishing for one more beer with a son he later rejected is framed as tender reflection, but it ends abruptly before the part of the story that would require introspection. The selective nostalgia conveniently bypasses the years of conflict that followed. And the emotional display, another round of tearless sorrow, suggests that someone has been giving him lessons in camera-ready crying. If so, he has learned from a master. Through the seasons, the emotional arithmetic remains remarkably consistent. Tears for themselves, stoicism for everyone else. The crying is never a response to the suffering of others. It is a branding exercise, a way to broadcast wounded innocence while dodging responsibility. The dry-eyed dabbing, the strained facial contortions, the insistence on their own victimhood, all of it forms a theatrical repertoire so familiar that viewers can practically recite the script. Neither performer is the empathetic anchor they imagine themselves to be. The manipulation is transparent, the emotional displays hollow, and the assumption that audiences won't notice is its own kind of arrogance. When a narcissist attempts to outshine another narcissist, the result isn't depth.
It's just louder acting. Here's what they never admit about the Browns. The real emotional labor wasn't plural marriage. It was surviving Cody and Robin's monologues. The spectacle of Cody and Robin attempting to navigate basic concepts, such as earnest money, apparently the great intellectual Everest of their household, often resembles watching side characters from Zoolander attempting real estate. The performance is so baffling, one begins to suspect that merely being in the same room requires hazard pay. The original three wives, for all their flaws, deserve medals for the sheer number of hours they spent subjected to these monologues. Cody, ever the man of 1,000 identical expressions, performs each new crisis with the same single bewildered stare, whether he's pontificating on special forces or emoting during yet another tell-all. Robin, meanwhile, delivers her contribution in the form of breathy, meandering laments that sound less like human speech and more like someone waking from light anesthesia. Together, they operate as a sort of dual-phase energy extraction system, emotional vampires without the glamour. It is little wonder that the older children, many of whom are demonstrably bright, appeared chronically exhausted. They were raised as miniature adults while watching Robin's children drift into regression after her marriage to Cody. The shift was strange, disconcerting, and deeply suggestive of unaddressed emotional upheaval, compounded by Cody's persistently unsettling body language around his adopted daughters. The whole tableau practically begs for a wellness check. Yet, even amid this chaos, the claim that the original three wives are intellectual titans is difficult to defend. Smart is a generous descriptor. Average is more honest. Janelle, in particular, has long clung to the idea of herself as the family's resident logician, a label repeated often enough that it apparently became a form of self-soothing. Her background, college attendance, an educated mother, suggests she had the tools. Her choices, however, often suggest otherwise. Illogical decisions, emotional rationalizations, and an unwavering faith in Cody's supposed intellect that borders on performance art. This dynamic became especially surreal when she positioned Cody, a man whose strategic thinking rarely extends beyond his own six-pack, as something akin to a philosopher king. If financial prudence were truly her strength, one might reasonably expect she would have siphoned off even a modest safety fund, rather than watching family finances funnel toward Robin's legal wife future while simply hoping for the best. Still, intelligence exists on a sliding scale, and proximity matters. Compared with Cody and Robin, whose combined reasoning skills could be stored comfortably in a carry-on, the original three can indeed appear clever. But the truth is less flattering. They were naive, inexperienced, and brought up in a belief system where emotional manipulation was practically a core curriculum. Christine even seemed to deliberately dim her own light to buff Cody's fragile glow, as if the only way to maintain household harmony was to pretend he was the smartest person in any room. In the end, the intellectual hierarchy of this family resembles a race where the bar is not so much low as sunken into the earth. The original wives clear it because someone must, but crowning them as brilliant thinkers is perhaps the most generous interpretation since the great earnest money saga, an episode that, for most functioning adults, would not even qualify as a plot point. Here's what they don't tell you about sister wives. The drama died long before the marriages did. The latest season delivers an unintended revelation. The show's only remaining pulse comes from Janelle, while everyone else drifts somewhere between decorative and dormant. Cody, Robin, and their brood offer all the excitement of a beige waiting room, Even Robin appears unsure why she's still contractually obligated to kiss Cody, and their home radiates the thrilling energy of an underlit storage unit. Christine and David, meanwhile, have settled into a storyline consisting exclusively of domestic bliss, facial treatments, and enthusiastic marital intimacy, an arrangement unquestionably delightful for them and profoundly tedious for viewers. Mary embarks on a journey of healing, flanked by an entourage whose most gripping contribution is giggling through affirmations and tepid dating chatter. The show dutifully films it all, as though sheer persistence might eventually make it interesting. Janelle, at least, possesses something resembling forward momentum. Grandchildren, land, new ventures, the raw ingredients of a plot. Unfortunately, even her arc isn't immune to filler. The bug-eating excursion to New Orleans demonstrated just how uninspiring the family becomes when removed from the gravitational pull of polygamy. The scene wasn't merely dull. It had the unmistakable air of a franchise scraping the bottom of its barrel in hopes the audience wouldn't notice. The so-called girls' trip only deepened the sense of artificiality. The group lacked genuine chemistry, leaving every laugh and anecdote suspiciously hollow. Their strikingly uniform mannerisms made Janelle look less like a friend and more like someone mistakenly added to a group outing organized by a multi-level marketing team. Ironically, Mary managed to steal the episode, not through grand revelations, but by sheer proximity to an emotionally competent roommate. Watching her shut down Cody's insincere apologies offered a rare moment of honest confrontation. The expression on his face was unintentionally cinematic. Her bed and breakfast renovation is one of the few developments with actual stakes. Yet, the show only offers fleeting glimpses of it in favor of manufactured segments elsewhere. Robin and Cody, once the center of controversy, now struggle to muster basic intrigue. The upcoming dual-car driving storyline promises all the narrative impact of a DMV instructional video. Christine's filmed scenarios, engineered simply to justify screen time, do little more than underscore how little remains to explore. Even the property sale drama, briefly poised to be substantive, dissolves under scrutiny. Janelle's admission that she encouraged Cody to force the sale momentarily dents her image, but the reality remains unchanged. The delay stemmed from Robin, whose refusal to sign until spring 2025 stalled the process long after the other three had approved it in fall 2024. At this stage, the entire project resembles a case study in unresolved indoctrination and arrested emotional development. The cast appears trapped, aging survivors of a belief system they still haven't fully disentangled from, orbiting a patriarch too self-involved to recognize his own role in the implosion. The result is less a reality show than a slow-motion melancholy.
If there is one remaining source of accidental comedy, it's the financial saga of Cody and Robin's overly ambitious home purchase. Watching them navigate the economics of that decision post-TLC would provide more authentic drama than anything currently filmed. Once the show's income stream dries up, reality, actual reality, will do what the editors no longer can. At this point, the series deserves either a dignified sunset or a merciful cancellation. The story has reached its natural conclusion, even if its participants haven't. Here's the uncomfortable truth about why Robin Brown treats basic politeness like a covert attack. Robin Brown has perfected a peculiar worldview in which basic courtesy is rebranded as girl games, as though saying hello were an advanced form of psychological warfare. In this universe, politeness is suspicious, kindness is manipulative, and the only authentic communication is an icy silence.
It's an impressive feat of mental gymnastics, if the goal is to remain permanently socially stalled at age 12. The dynamic with Cody only magnifies the absurdity. He eagerly accepts Robin's redefinition of civility, convinced she possesses some rare gift for interpreting interpersonal nuance. In reality, the only nuance on display is her habit of casting every disagreement among women as a covert battle. The result is a relationship where both parties congratulate themselves for their emotional depth, while demonstrating the maturity of middle schoolers. This episode delivered a textbook example. Robin simultaneously insists she refuses to engage in fake nice, while also claiming she nobly forces herself to interact with people she'd rather avoid because it's the right thing to do. Which is it? Principled silence or valiant effort? The more likely explanation is a third option: communication reserved exclusively for explaining how others have failed her. Her contradictions were plentiful, yet none more baffling than the scene at Coyote Pass. The gathering allegedly existed for paperwork, an activity that could occur in any civilized location with chairs. Instead, the production attempted to engineer a dramatic standoff, only to discover that these participants cannot manage basic interaction, let alone staged tension. Their collective social awkwardness swallowed the scene whole, leaving nothing but dead air and secondhand embarrassment. Even the network appears to recognize the futility. It is difficult to build a show around people who refuse to speak to one another. This chronic maladaptation extends beyond the family bubble. Even in environments designed to strip away social complexity, such as the artificially intense setting of special forces, Cody still emerged as an outlier. They function only within the rules of the ecosystem they created, which conveniently designates every outside space and person as unsafe. At the heart of the issue is a confusion between fakery and civility. There is a wide spectrum between sugary superficiality and blunt hostility. Yet this family behaves as though those are the only two settings on the dial. Politeness is not deception. It is the social lubricant that allows adults to share air without descending into melodrama. The refusal to perform even the bare minimum, simple greetings, cordial farewells, reveals less about authenticity and more about an alarming deficit in basic social competence. If civility is a game, the Browns remain steadfastly uninterested in learning the rules. Subscribe.